Hi everyone. Wish I could see you all in person right now, but that will have to wait one more week because this is our final week online. I hope this online experience has been working for you. It's kind of been working for me, I gotta say. Like, I can attend church in my PJs, I can watch things at 2 times speed because I can go to the washroom and pause the video and then catch up, or I can run around and dance with the kids during worship set. So online isn't all bad. You know, speaking of things online, I came across this restaurant review online, and it's for a pizza place. It's called 20 Mans, some place in the UK. It's run by a guy named Andrew 20 Man. I can tell from the reviews that some people really love the pizza there. Here's a typical review. It says, "Love the pizzas and the ambiance, excellent staff and service, 5 stars." But if you scroll through all the comments of the 5-star comments from the happy customers, you'll find one review that really took a detour and is written directly to the owner. It says, "I know about the affair, Andrew. I've always known. And here's something you didn't know. You got my wife pregnant. The boy is 8 now. Since that boy was born, I've given him nothing but love. And in return, he looks at me, smiles, and says, 'I love you, Dad.' There's nothing quite like being a father, Andrew. All these moments as you watch them grow up, you were there to celebrate their victories and help them back up after any failure. The love is pure and unconditional. You will never know that. And this is my revenge, Andrew. What should have been the best days of your life are mine now. All the love you would have received, I have taken that from you. I have stolen your joy." The pizza was really good. 5 stars. I have 2 comments to make from that post. One is that I really want to go to that restaurant now because that must be some awesome pizza. Like, if it got 5 stars from this guy. And it's not like this guy has no options for pizza, because if you look at Google Maps, there's a Papa John's pizza like 1 block away. Like, it's literally 20 steps away or something like that. But after all these years and all that drama, that customer still goes to the same pizza place and gives them a 5-star rating. So that pizza must be awesome. But my other comment is, of course, that it's kind of sad if you think about what happened to all these people. Like, I feel bad for the owner who has to live with that history. I feel bad for the customer who got cheated on, and also for his wife and son. And their stories are a reminder to us that relationships can be complicated and messy. They don't always go the way we first intended. It's like that with our relationship with God too. In a way, it's even harder to have a good relationship with God because we can't see Him. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people have a rocky relationship with God. Which leads me to my big question today. My question is, how can we have a great relationship with God? I'd say this is one of the most important questions in life. A relationship with God affects our eternal destiny, of course, which is important enough. But it also affects other people's eternal destiny. And even if you don't think about the stuff of eternity, a great relationship with God normally leads to a better earthly life too. Like, it's not guaranteed, there are exceptions, and it's definitely not the most important part of our relationship with God, but normally the odds are stacked in favor of the godly even in this life. And we find that when we study the book of Proverbs. And so it's really important to have a good relationship with God. But the problem is a lot of people don't know how to have a good relationship with God, even if they've been to church for a long time. Yeah, if you ask a typical Christian, how's their relationship with God? They might say they need to read their Bible more, they need to pray more. I think most of the time the Christians are actually missing the point. Like, don't get me wrong, it's good to pray, it's really important to study the Bible. But when I was growing up, I did all these things a lot. And all my efforts to get things right just made me rigid and judgmental. And no matter how hard I tried, my whole relationship with God felt unhealthy. But fortunately for us, our Bible passage today teaches us a better way to relate to God. Today we're finishing off our series in the Ten Commandments. We've spent the last several weeks learning about what God wants us to do and how He wants us to live. But today we will cover the beginning of the Ten Commandments. We're going to think about why we're doing all this stuff. And it's the beginning that makes all the other commandments work properly. So now let's read from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 1 to 7. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship to them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. That's our Bible passage today. And I want to draw out two big ideas from this passage, both based on the idea of God's name. First, we need to remember God's name. And second, we need to represent God's name. That's how we can have a good relationship with God. Remember God's name and represent God's name. And if we do these things well, we will live the life that God intended, and it will become the greatest possible life. That said, the first key to a great relationship with God is to remember God's name. I thought I'd start this point by talking about one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. It was the day my brother got married. My brother was born and raised in Vancouver, just like I was. And the wedding was in Vancouver. But the other side of his family came from Asia. So we had about a dozen guests from Asia, and naturally it was my family's job to take care of them. We wanted to make a good impression because these were our future family members. So the day came for the wedding. It was going pretty well. We had the ceremony. We had a banquet in the evening. It was nice. And then after the banquet, it was my job to drive home the brother of the bride, and also a couple of the other guests from Asia. So I had to drive them from the banquet place in downtown Vancouver to their hotel in Richmond, which was the next city over. And with traffic, it was about 40 minutes away. I didn't know Richmond very well, so I asked someone for directions. I asked for a map. They told me, don't worry, you don't have to write it down. You just have to remember these 3 turns, and you're right there. You can't miss it. So off I went. I drove a car full of VIPs, and I drove for about 40 minutes across the bridge from Vancouver to Richmond on that highway, and I was wondering where my exit was. And after several minutes of driving, I realized I had missed my exit, because whoever gave me directions didn't tell me which exit to take on the highway. And so I was so lost. I had no GPS, no data on my phone to get me to Google Maps, no idea where to exit. I was just driving on the highway with no sense of direction. And to make it worse, the visibility was really bad because it was super dark. It was raining really hard. My car was running out of gas as well. So I exited the highway on the wrong side of Richmond, and I parked in a neighborhood. I made a phone call to my sister. She told me to just stay put and she would come and rescue me. And while we were waiting, one of the guests in my car had to go to the washroom, but we were in the middle of the rainstorm, so we couldn't just go in a bush or something. So we ended up peeing in a bag in my car. And then my sister came and she transferred all the guests to her car, and I just found my way back home by myself. And that might have been the most embarrassing moment of my life. I felt so bad because those new family members depended on me. I didn't deliver. And I know that they still remember that moment all these years later because the bride's mom keeps on reminding her son to thank me for showing him around Richmond that night. And I'm thinking, no, you should just forget that. Don't remind me. Let's just, don't talk about it. But I mentioned that story because it's an example of how our past shapes our relationships And that's how it worked in our Bible passage too. See, God had a history with his people, and it shaped their relationship. Only in God's case, he hadn't made a fool of himself, but instead God had done something really awesome, something worth remembering. I'll read to you now from the first couple verses of our passage. It says, "And God spoke all these words, 'I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery.'" So this is the very first thing God says before he tells us what to do. Before we do anything, we have to remember what he's done already. God doesn't want us to just do things because he said so. He wants us to understand him. He wants us to know him. We have to understand that he's already done more for us than we will ever do for him. We have to understand that he's really good to us and we can trust him. Because if we don't remember these things about God, we'll end up with a seriously wrong understanding about God, and it'll be basically impossible to have a proper relationship with him. One of my favorite movies of all time, well, one of my favorite old movies anyway, is called Pearl Harbor. It's a love story set in the context of the Second World War. It's got a bit of everything. And the hero of the story is a pilot of a fighter plane. He's the best fighter pilot in his class. And at the height of the war, he volunteers to go to Great Britain to help them defend their homeland against the Nazis. And our hero manages to make a difference. But one day he's shot down over the ocean, and his girlfriend back in America mourns his death. But he's not really dead. And when he gets back to her, he says to her, "I should have died over there. When I was in that water, I made a deal with God. I told him I was sorry, that I knew I'd been a fool for leaving you, trying to go over there and be a hero. And I promised I'd never ask for anything again if I could just see you one more time." That's what he said. Makes for some pretty good movie lines. But that's just a really wrong understanding of God, because if you have a really close relationship with somebody, you don't say to them, "Just do this one thing for me and I'll never ask for something again." Like that, we don't say that to people close to us. But the hero in our movie thought about God in a really pagan way. Now, if you've been in church for years, you've been taught better about God. And at least in theory, we know that God is better than what the hero thought. We know that we have a God who loves us more than we love ourselves. And God knows our needs before we ask. And he's committed to taking care of us. And he's redeeming every bad thing that's ever happening to us. And even when he tells us to do difficult things, it's because he has a better plan. We hear these ideas all the time. We sing about them all the time. But it's one thing to know the theory, and it's another thing to live it out. There's one time when we were teenagers, my brother decided to troll my sister with an experiment. My whole family back then lived under one roof, and one day my brother brought home a bag of chocolate raisins. It was a huge bag, must have been 2 or 3 pounds. It's the kind of bag that you would get from the bulk bins at Superstore. And he planted that bag of chocolate raisins in my sister's room, right on her desk. And my sister was like, "No, take it away." She didn't want to get fat. My brother didn't take it away. And my sister didn't take it out of her own room. And even though my sister knew it was a trap, she ended up eating the entire bag. Which was kind of mean of my brother to do that to her, but it's just one example of where we know in our head what's the best thing for ourselves, but it doesn't automatically mean we'll live it out. Now, as Christians, it's not automatic that we'll live out what we believe. And so we have to keep working on our applications. We need to process the old familiar truth again and again. So when you attend church and you listen to songs and sermons, don't just tell yourself you've heard these things before. That's not the point. We have to let the old truth ring true again. Every chance we get, we have to align our lives more and more fully to the theory that we already know. Because it's only as we revisit the same idea over and over again do we get a chance to work out the proper application for our life. So let's embrace the repetition. because it's good for life change and we really need it. And that wraps up my first point. My first point is we need to remember God's name, meaning we need to remember the reputation he has built for himself. We need to remember the full goodness of God and keep going back to it so that you'll know that you trust him. Moving on, my second point is that we need to represent God's name. Not just remember, but also represent. Recently, I watched a movie. It's called Ford versus Ferrari, starring Matt Damon and Christian Bale. Really fun movie. It's about some guys trying to beat Ferraris in a race. It's actually based on a true story, which makes it even better. The true story is that back in the 1960s, the Ford Motor Company had a problem. Their car sales were going down, and one of the reasons was because Ford didn't really have enough prestige. Because their cars would compete in races, but they kept on losing those races. So Fords weren't known as the cars of winners. Now, there was a quick way to get their cars better. They knew that the Ferrari company was in financial trouble, and they could actually buy out the whole Ferrari company and put the Ford logo on the Ferrari cars, and the Ferraris would win the races for them. But the Ferrari company turned down the deal. And the CEO of Ford took it really personally, and in revenge, the CEO decided to build a supercar that could beat Ferrari at its own game. So the CEO gave his racing team a blank check, so they can get the best mechanics and the best minds and the best drivers. And they took on Ferrari in the most prestigious endurance race in the world, and they won. And for 3 years after that, they defended their title 3 more times so that nobody could doubt that Ford was the car manufacturer of champions. You know, there's a reason why this story makes sense. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of guys trying to work really hard in a car and it just keeps on not working. But the reason why this story makes sense is because names matter. Like, I'm not so much talking about the pronunciation of like Ford or Ferrari. It's not so much the names that our parents gave us when we were born, but I'm talking about the reputations that we earn, which are attached to our names. You know, car companies succeed or fail depending on their reputation. And so also our mission as Christians will succeed or fail depending on our reputation and God's reputation. And that is the point of the third commandment. I want to read to you the last verse of our Bible passage, and I'll read it this time from a more technical Bible for more precision. So it's Exodus 20, verse 7 from the NASB Bible, which is a really nice technical Bible. It says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain." You can tell why our NAV Bible kind of smooths over this with kind of easy reading language, because you read this for the first time and you're like, what the heck is it talking about? But if you understand what the Hebrew is saying, it's actually kind of cool. The Hebrew word for take here literally means to carry, taking the name of the Lord. It's kind of like how athletes in the Olympics carry the name of their country. They're not just competing for themselves, but they're competing for the honor of their country, and everything they do reflects on their country. And in the same way as Christians, we carry the name of Christ, and everything we do reflects on Christ. And so God teaches us that we should always be thinking about his name. In the Lord's Prayer, the first thing we pray is, "Hallowed be your name." Jesus said this is how you should pray, because this is our priority. God's name is so central to his mission. And later on in the Bible, it's explained why his name is so important. It's because there is no other name by which we may be saved. God's name is about the salvation of the whole world. If people think poorly of God, there is no way they will start a relationship with him. But if they're impressed by God, if they're impressed by Christ and the Christians who carry his name, then they have a chance. And so we have to be careful about the way we represent God. Sometimes when it snows, I have to go outside my home to shovel. It's -20 outside and my fingers are getting cold, and I just want to get back inside as fast as I can. But after I've shoveled the front of my house, I think to myself, what will my neighbors think if I just shovel only the front of my house? Will they think I'm selfish? And I think to myself, okay, even though I don't feel like shoveling their sidewalk, I will shovel it for the sake of the name, so that nobody will think I'm selfish, so that I won't bring dishonor to God. And so that's just one example of avoiding dishonor. But it's not just about avoiding bad impressions. It's also about seeking honor for God. That's the main point, I would say, about the third commandment. It's about helping people to know God as the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. And that's why we follow the rest of the 10 commandments. The rest of the 10 commandments are about honoring God with our time and family life and our love life and all of our interactions with our neighbors. It's about living a life of wisdom, God's wisdom, and excellence, which brings honor to God. We can show people a better life. We can show people that we have hope and joy and wisdom and community and power in ways that nobody else has outside a relationship with God. And we can live these things out. And as we demonstrate the goodness of God to other people, we bring honor to God. I want to end now by showing you just one last thing in our Bible passage so you can just see how it all fits together. Our Bible passage, as it turns out, is built as a sandwich of ideas, and whenever the Bible does these sandwich structures, it's coaching us on how to read it. So the middle of the sandwich is actually the most important part. It always is. It's the commandment to not have other gods and not worship idols. And if you think about it, that commandment is just another way of saying the greatest commandment in the Bible, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart. But today I've concentrated on the outer parts of the sandwich, because the outer parts show us how we love the Lord. How do we do this greatest commandment? First, we need to remember what God has done. We need to remember his name, the reputation he's made for himself. We need to let the truth of his character ring true again and again in our hearts. We need to embrace the repetition so we can absorb the message of the Bible and put it into practice. And lastly, we need to represent God's name. And so part of that is avoiding making bad impressions. But more importantly, we have to seek honor for God. And we do that by living out God's plan in the 10 Commandments with every part of our life. And if we do that well, we'll show people that God is the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. And we'll bring honor to God. And we will fulfill our part in our relationship with God. And God will do his part. And in the end, we will have a great relationship with God and the greatest possible life. That is the point of the beginning of the 10 Commandments. Let's pray to close. God, you have a good plan for us. It's not a plan that most of us would have chosen or even thought of, but it's better. So help us to follow it. Help us to remember what you've done so we can trust you. Help us to represent you well for your glory and for our joy. Amen.